Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Sarah Burnett is Executive Vice President at Everest Group with a focus on digital systems, AI, and automation. She's the chair of the British Computer Society Women Group, and she founded the BCS AI Accelerator. She's also a tech mentor at Durham University, helping women into careers in IT. Sarah recently published a research paper assessing all of the top robotic process automation companies, over 20 of them. It was called the Peak Matrix Assessment for RPA, and I called her to ask about the companies featured in the research and her main findings and predictions for RPA today. Well, I read the research, the Peak Matrix Assessment research you published in July, focused on robotic process automation. Could we start with a summary maybe of some of the most important findings, or sort of, the executive summary of this research?
Yes, so I've got three key points that I'd like to share with you. Firstly, it's that the technology is constantly evolving, and one area that I find particularly interesting because of my interest in AI is that the robots are becoming more intelligent. So not just the robots, but also the control system that manages those robots within those software packages. So I'll give you some examples. For some years now, we've seen increasingly vendors adding computer vision to their robots. This is particularly important in areas, for example, where Citrix is involved, because you have to handle images differently rather than using screen objects. You have to take a look at the image and recognize what object is on the screen, whether it's a login box or a OK button, those kind of things. And this is quite difficult to do with RPA. And so they've been adding computer vision to enable that to happen more smoothly. There's a lot of skills being added as well. So robots with skills is the new development, relatively new development, where the vendors are combining their technologies, either developing their own or combining with natural language processing software vendors, so the robots can do some aspects of document processing as well. And what that means is that you can automate processes more end to end, not just the transactional part, but the document part as well. Then there is the market itself, the way that the market is growing. It's phenomenally growing at 80% a year. Really, it's unlike any other market segment that I've known. It passed the 1 billion mark for the first time in 2018, and we're very accurate. People question our estimates, but we are very accurate with our estimates, and we only talk about the third-party RPA software vendor revenues and the market based on those. We don't take into account the consulting firms and the system integrators in this space. It's purely the software market. But there is a but. So it's growing phenomenally. Loads of new customers for these vendors. They are buying the software and all across the world as well. But there is a but, and that is the existing customers aren't buying quite as much as the new buyers. And RPA vendors should really take note of this, because why is it that the existing buyers aren't expanding? Why aren't they ordering robots in thousands? So they need to address any challenges that the existing customers have with scaling up. For example, they could make, one thing I would love to see is making the exception handling more intelligent. So when a robot can't handle something, instead of raising an exception, which in one day, if there are lots of robots running, could create a flood of exceptions, adding some intelligence to that. So there are things that vendors could do to enhance that part. And thirdly, the point that I'd like to cover is the kind of convergence with adjacent technologies. For example, we are seeing the addition of process discovery and automation recommenders to RPA software. Vendors are either doing their own or integrating with third-party providers in this space. So what this means is that where organizations have a lack of process documentation, these types of software, they can help them with actually identifying the key steps of a process and then mapping the process so that it can be automated. Some leverage technologies such as user action recordings on the keyboard and the mouse. Others go through event logs and analyze those in order to create the process path and map those steps that are necessary for automation. So those are the three of the biggest things that I believe we are seeing in this market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. And you mentioned there about being confident of your figures, the feature in the research, and that's interesting itself, because RPA, I think that it goes back just over a decade now, but people still talk of it as a hyped technology. But now, after several years doing this research and looking at genuine case studies, do you think that it's actually arrived and we can actually go out and look at valuable case studies right now?
So let me take the question about hype, and I think it was hyped. But really, it's not surprising because there's a lot more that RPA represents than it first sort of meets the eye. There's a lot more to it than just screen scraping and capturing steps and automating them. Being able to automate business processes and augment the robots with AI to make simple business decisions really is going to change the way that we work. So these are the first steps, in my view, in revolutionizing business processes. We've had industrial revolutions before, and people talk about AI being the fifth industrial revolution. Well, in my view, RPA combined with AI together, their intelligent automation, are making people think about their business processes differently. They're codifying their business processes. And I think this is the start of the revolution in enterprise process automation. And it's only really the beginning. And I think there is some learning to do. So by no means is it a mature market yet. Although the technology has been around, it's been evolving and it's been becoming more enterprise friendly with better features. And so there's still a lot of learning to happen for the users, how to use this technology best, how to make sure that, they don't end up having loads of failures, planning correctly and starting with simpler tasks and learning so that they can handle the more complex processes over time. All of these things take time for organizations to learn, but I come across a lot of successful case studies. A lot of it is to do with updating data, customer records, handling changes that come in, handling information that comes in by clients or partners in spreadsheets that have non-standardized data. So the date formats could be different in every row. There could be different currencies. The robots are handling these. They're checking those data entries and seeing if they need to do some, swapping of data formats and putting those, correcting them and entering them into the correct systems. These would have taken a lot of time manually. And these are just some of the very basic examples that I come across. Overall, we find 30% cost saving is a fairly standard figure that users tell us they've achieved. And there are other benefits to improved operational metrics, reduction in staff attrition and hiring needs, and so on. So it is working for many organizations. The trick is to go, to have a happy path and not go for too complex a process from the start, so that if that fails, then you lose a lot of credibility in the organization.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I wanted to ask you about how companies are choosing which RPA vendor to work with. I know in your research you evaluated 22 different products, but I think that only 4 of them were ranked as leaders. So are you finding that the end user is going to a consultant or advisor to do a selection of the best RPA tool, or are the actual vendors going out there and running pilots and trying to directly find clients?
So there are different ways. Many of them clients tell us that they do use analyst reports. So they definitely use Everest Group's RPA peak matrix, at least as a starting point, as a guide. They also invite the vendors to come and demonstrate. So they bring them in. Some have one day, well, they all come in and demonstrate certain things, and they customers make their decisions based on what they're seeing and shortlisting their favorites after that kind of assessment for themselves. There are other things that also makes them decide. So we're seeing a surge in demand for desktop automation. This is the kind of assisted automation that was around for a long time, particularly in the sort of contact center automation. And there's a resurgence for that. And companies are talking about giving robots to their, knowledge worker, information worker type of employees as well. So some enterprises tell us that they only want to work with vendors that do both of those, both the robotic desktop automation, RDA, and RPA. That's, for example, one kind of thing that would drive their decision. Others like extensive integration with third-party products. So I mentioned process discovery, process mining tools, those kind of things. Certainly with AI, being able to do natural language processing without having to leave one product and, pass the information to another product. That's an important feature for some. And then we see those that have existing relationships, because some of these vendors are pure play RPA vendors, but there are others that have a portfolio of software solutions. They have other clients that, for example, might have worked with them in the contact center world, or they might have worked with them in the web data capture kind of world, and they tend to stick with them. So they know the vendor, they know what kind of service they get from them, and they stick with them. So there are different reasons, but it's not unusual to start with a good analyst report and then do those kind of assessments that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. And I saw that, I mentioned there about the leaders, and out of the 22, you had 4 as leading in their sector. And also, it was interesting that these leaders, in terms of functionality, are also gaining the most revenue. So if I'm looking across the board of all of those different vendors and trying to select one, should I be concerned if I like the look of one, but it's not ranked as a leader? Because, next year they might just be acquired. Is this kind of market consolidation something that you expect to see? And maybe this range of 22 options is going to drop down to, I don't know, fewer than 10 or half a dozen that are all really good at what they do?
So let me go back to the question about the leaders. So first of all, the ones that are leaders who've gained a lot of market momentum were in this field very early on. And so they established their brand and have since been able to get a lot of capital injection. In case of Blue Prism, of course, they raised funds through share issue. Selecting a vendor really depends on what you want them to do, if you want all the bells and whistles. When we do our assessments, we look at the whole spectrum of the features that they're offering, and it's a very broad assessment, and there are some of those that we have ranked as aspirants or major contenders might not have all the bells and whistles, but the core product is still good. Otherwise, they wouldn't, for example, be a major contender in our assessment. So they do offer great features. And, I recommend enterprises take a look at the assessments that we do, and then also do their own exploration of, what are these features? Do I actually want them? And then, also bear in mind the way that the market evolved and has matured, is still really maturing as well. The other thing is, software acquisition acquisition of software vendors is always on the cards, in any market. And it doesn't necessarily mean that those vendors are at any kind of risk. This very rarely does a company actually buy a vendor to take it out of the market. What we do see is that they maintain the software, and we've had a couple of examples already in the RPA market. Firstly, Pega acquired OpenSpan, and the product is very much in the market, and they're developing it and supporting it. Then SAP acquired Contexta, and that's still very much on the in the market, and now being supported. Both those products are now being supported by bigger vendors than the original companies. So there's always a risk with mergers and acquisitions, but it's no different really for the RPA market.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, leading on from that, what do you see as the roadmap for RPA and automation over the next 12 to 18 months? What trends or issues do you expect we're going to see?
Well, I think there is this opportunity for a robot on every desktop that we hear. This is the latest campaign that several of them are talking about. And I didn't really think originally that that's actually going to happen, but having interviewed a number of enterprises that are doing it, and they're saying they're getting great results, I think that's probably going to be a new growth area. But it really depends on how they play their cards, because you want to have employees that know how to use those robots, how to program them for themselves, and then be supported. So just giving everyone a robot on the desktop isn't going to work. And the enterprises that are saying they're successful have done just that. They've done a load of training, they're doing a load of hand holding. And for the vendors as well, they need to make the products very easy, even easier to be used by, non-techie people. So I think that's probably the area where we're going to see demand growing. The continuation of making the robots easier to run and manage, and for the intelligence to be increased in the robots, and making live operations smoother to run, I think is the area that will see some focus, as well as making it easier to use by non-techie people. And then just yesterday, I heard about this development by Softmotive, which is a RPA language which they are bringing to market via the open source route. So that's an interesting development, which I'll have to get my head around. But I think potentially it can make a big difference to the market and democratize RPA in a way that we haven't seen yet, as well as possibly do away with some of the platform dependencies that we have currently, the vendor lock-in. So very new, really hot news, but I haven't had a chance to actually analyze it yet.
And then just as a final point, based on what you just said there, do you think that we're moving into an environment where companies will equip professionals across many different industries with these robots to basically help them with a lot of their repetitive, mundane tasks? But at the same time, that means that people in jobs like the law or HR, they're going to need to know a little bit of coding to make these robots work. Yes,
I think basically we will see some form of robots on our desktops, and these will be made very easy for us to use, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they were also connected to the voice interfaces that we already have on our desktops. So you could actually ask the robots to do things, having programmed them, of course, beforehand. So I think we will have these, and it's really the next productivity revolution will come on the back of this. We had, the Microsoft Office productivity revolution previously. This is personal productivity I'm talking about. And yes, I think we will see that in the future.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I am at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.